So, hello everyone, this is just a video I wanted to make for someone who asked for it, and it was about pouring a Stihl 038 cylinder. So, right there, Stihl, and there's the part number. Hope you can read that, but for those of you who don't know how to decode Stihl part numbers, this is a 038 AV Super cylinder off of a fairly early one. So, what the person was asking about was for tips and tricks on pouring 038s. He has an 038 AV, which is the smallest bore, same stroke. The 038 AV Super has the same stroke, slightly bigger bore, and the 038 Magnum has the same stroke, but the largest bore. The 038 AV Super, which this is the equivalent of this, Husky 266. The 038 Mag is the equivalent of a Husky 272, and these are about the equivalent of a Husky 61. So, the Supers are my favorite to port. They're the easiest to port. It's still a shorter stroke saw than say an 044, but they're not quite as short of a stroke compared to bore size as the Magnums. And the 038 AV, just the regular AV, is the easiest to port. That you port almost like you would any other saw. Again, these are slightly different. So the best comparison I have is a Stihl 044. So what I do, this is stock, all stock on this side. You do not have to do finger ports. I just do finger ports for a lot of my Hutter saws, and for people who want them, this finger took about an hour, that one took about an hour. They take about an hour each to do, along with blending these transfers in, making them as large as possible without overlapping the piston skirt. That's very important. You need the piston skirt to be fully supported if you want a good long-running saw. But as you can see, just leave burr finish. Ignore that white line. That's just where the chrome plating had worn off. This was pretty much a junk cylinder. I knew that. I ported one side, left one side stock, poured the intake, poured the exhaust, polished the exhaust. This is just now a demonstration tool. Someday I might port the other side, send it out to be plated, and throw it back on, but for now, this is perfect for days like this where people want advice. So for the exhaust, as you can see, I leave the exhaust size on the exit about the same. I go a little bit more. I just match the gaskets. And on the inside, depending on what you're looking for, a higher exhaust groove provides higher RPM, but you lose a little bit of low end. Smaller exhaust, you gain a little bit more torque, but you lose a little high end. That's due to partially the compression. The higher exhaust groove actually lowers your compression. It depends on the saw, but sometimes by a substantial amount, depending on how far you go. Compression and pouring is a story for a whole nother video, but for these, especially being a shorter stroke saw, I tend to leave the exhaust roofs relatively low. 038s out of the box have, in my opinion, about as much RPM as I'd want. I usually raise them about 1, maybe 2 degrees, but that's maximum. I really don't try to add too much exhaust height. The exhaust, there you go, you can see. I do actually increase the size of them, but I keep the corners having a nice oval shape. I want the entire thing to be nice and oval, arched roof rather than a flat roof. That way you do not ever snag the piston ring in the exhaust, which I have seen. I have done it on some of the real high-end builds where I'm super winding the exhaust. It's not pretty. The last thing on the exhaust I want to mention is this isn't the full polish I do for, say, a customer saw, but I do polish them, and you actually can see there is a good bit of shine off it. For a customer saw, I do a true full mirror polish. Here's that's the intake. That's what stock exhaust usually looks like on a used saw, caked in carbon and fairly rough. polishing, it actually does decrease the carbon buildup, as the carbon has no place to actually start building up. It just slides right out. The other thing, that edge, after I polish it, I deburr it with a diamond stone, same way I would any of those ports. Now, the intake. The 038 has a interesting intake. As you can see, it's lunged from the factory. This one, I did sharpen the lung, as you can see. I don't fully knife edge them, as some people might, but I do sharpen them, help the airflow. And I also even them out, because, as you can see, both sides have about equal area now, and should flow about the same. The best way to test it is running it underwater. These intakes from the factory are a little lopsided. As you can see, this one I did have to widen just a bit. This one, I did widen it a touch, but not a ton. And I kept, again, I keep that same shape. These, I like a little arch, long and a little arch. And take the timing off the top of both of the arches, rather than it being straight across. That's more of a personal preference thing, but that's how I do it, and that's how I found these saws run the best. But other than that, make sure you deburr your cylinders, make sure you hone it. The spark plug holes, I just clean out. The intake, this is the other key thing. Notice, I did increase the in-turning size, but I kept this the same. I did wind it just a touch, and just a touch there. And by just a touch, I mean a couple of thousandths, 1, maybe 2 passes with the Dremel maximum. That, you make sure you keep plenty of meat so that the sealing groove doesn't get broken into. I have seen saws with that from other porters. Not gonna name who they are, out of respect. But everyone does. If you do this long enough and try for enough gains, someday you will break through one. It's not a huge deal. Depending on the saw, if it was my personal saw, I'd put sealer on it, maybe a little JB weld, and still run it. But again, less than ideal. But the reason you keep this the same size is the intake boots on these. The intake boots, I actually do have one. Give me 1 second and I will grab it. The intake boots on these actually have a specific size and shape on the intake side, and that is the main reason you can't actually make that any bigger or make that into a true circle like you would on, say, an 046, 046, 044, one of those style saws. And I actually might not have an intake boot. I might have actually thrown that in a different saw. 1 second. Sorry about this. I probably should have been more prepared for this video, but this is just something I wanted to throw together quickly for someone who asked about it. Again, I apologize for just leaving you with the black screen, but again, quickly, there it is. So, this is just a cheap generic intake boot that I had lying around. As you can see, these do have texture on the intake, but as you can see, there's that same pattern. So, turning this into a full circle and fully boring it out would not actually do anything. It would actually hinder your performance, as when it came past there into just a void, it would actually create a small eddy there, allowing gas and stuff to pool there rather than being fully sent into the intake and into your combustion chamber. So these saws, I tend not to do a lot of machine work too. Generally speaking, I like where the transfers line up. Every once in a while, I will do a little machining, maybe take a couple thou off. But I like keeping these relatively sane. They got a nice shaped combustion chamber from the factory. They have a real nice squish band. I'm talking about these specific Molly cylinders, but these saws from the factory run great, but a little bit boring. Mainly the intake and that slight exhaust mod make most of your true gains. You got it. For me, I personally like huge hogged out transfers. That's another one of those videos I need to make at some point. My opinions on transfers, everyone has a slightly different one. I've just run big transfers on most of my saws, and I find the larger transfers tend to work better. The other piece of advice is when you do these finger ports, actually, not a full knife edge, but make it come to some sort of an edge on the transitions between them as it goes into the fingers. It just helps the exhaust, or not the exhaust, the intake flow. Helps that charge flow around them and flow into them better. For the pistons I just treat the same as any other piston, lighten them up. If there's any questions, I can make a full video on that, as there are some saws where I don't even do real pouring. I just do a couple of quick piston mods. There's a few more in-depth piston mods that can make a big difference, that especially help on these. It's lateral gas porting. That's more advanced. If it's your first time pouring a saw, don't worry about it, but especially with these, especially the Magnum version being such a short stroke compared to the bore, lateral gas pouring helps keep compression up even higher and helps gain back a little of what you lose being such a short stroke and with great exhaust roof. The thing I wanted to show, this is the exhaust gasket, and right there. See, I just match the exhaust gasket. Sometimes I leave a little bit smaller, but for this, a lot of times you want to leave about 1/16 gap, because within the gasket itself, they can move a little, and then the muffler can, which will block off parts of your intake port. As long as you're really careful lining it up when you tighten everything down, it should hold. If you use, I tend to use Loctite on these, just because having a exhaust bolt rattle out and back into your exhaust would ruin a ported cylinder, ruin any cylinder, and I've spent hours on port work, so I don't want to, but it's just one of those things to keep in mind for these, especially where I do pipes, and I make the pipe fit the gasket and the actual cylinder bolts, or exhaust bolts, perfectly. There is no way for it to get misaligned, so it's a little bit easier. But overall, pouring these 038s, they're fairly simple, especially the 038 AVs and the 038 AV Supers. The Magnums are where you start getting into issues where you gotta be really careful on your transfers, your intakes, and your exhaust, being such a short stroke compared to bore. That's another video, if there's any interest, I can make why bore and stroke matter. 038 AV Super or 038 AV Mag, or Mag 2, is 72 cc's, along with the Stihl 044. Why do they run so different? A lot of it comes down to bore and stroke and a couple other small things, but the bore and stroke, that ratio is very important to how saws run. But these are just a few of the tips I have for pouring 038s. If you have any more questions, if you want me to break down pouring 390 or 46, my 038 is actually out on a job currently, or 55 Ranchers, which this I use to hold all my tools, just all the picks and stuff I use taking down saws. That's ported up. But if you guys have any questions on pouring a specific saw, please leave in the comments. I'm more than happy to help, and thank you. Just at the end of this, I just want to say thank you all. I'm at over 3,500 subscribers, which is huge for me. It's a number I never thought I'd see, and I'm really thankful. I've had a few ups and downs. Viewership goes up, viewership goes down, and as long as people are watching and still interested and are learning something, I'm going to keep doing this. I don't care that I'm not monetized. I'm not in this for the money. I'm here just to help you guys. So, one of the other things, I had another scare with this today, with my channel being shut down. So, I am actually gonna start a second channel at some point, just as a backup, just in case. Gotten a couple strikes on for a couple different things. It's not a huge deal, but something that I am cognizant about, and it's, again, this is info that I find actually does help some people, and as long as this info helps people, I want to keep it up on YouTube, so stay tuned for that. But overall, this is pouring 038. This is, again, 038 AV Super Cylinder, 038 Mags, 038, all of them. They're all great saws. A little heavy, but on sport, they become awesome saws. So, thank you all for watching, and I really appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.